I'm going to talk a little bit about last-minute test day prep, but I will also be talking about, of course, retake prep, given that that's the theme of tonight's session. And I'm going to be talking about it from the perspective of someone who is shooting to get a 180. Not necessarily that you expect to get a 180 or even that you're necessarily trying to get a 180, but rather it's a place to come from, even if it isn't necessarily a place to get to. If you study for the Lsat with the goal of getting a 180 in mind, and you think about the Lsat from the perspective of someone who is able to get a 180, what would they be able to do? How would they look at the Lsat problems? That can inform your Lsat study approach accordingly. Now, a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me really quick. My name is Steve Schwartz. I run the Lsat blog. I also host the Lsat Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast. I've been teaching the Lsat since 2005, and that was the result of a very long Lsat study journey of my own. It took me over an entire year of painstaking studying, but I eventually achieved my goal of achieving a 175 on the Lsat. And I actually never ended up even going to law school, strangely enough. I really got weirdly obsessed with the Lsat because it is a truly complex exam, and I'm still learning more about it every single day when I'm analyzing problems, just how deep the rabbit hole goes. There's a certain appreciation for this exam I think it's really important to cultivate because it's a much more difficult and complex exam than really any other standardized test I've ever come across before. It's harder than the GRE, it's harder than the GMAT, and it's certainly harder than the SAT or the ACT. And so it's probably unlike anything you've ever come across up to this point. And achieving a 180, achieving a top score, really comes down to a combination of a couple of things. One of them is having an obsessive attention to detail. Basically, LSAT problems are like legalese. They're like contracts, which is why this exam is used for law school admissions. The other thing I want to call your attention to is never letting go of any mistake you make. Anything that you do not 100% understand, you need to analyze that on a deeper level because it will come up again. This exam repeats itself. It is truly a test of pattern recognition, not a test of simply memorization, and certainly not a test of content. The same methods of reasoning come up again and again, and the same tricks and traps come up again and again. Some more commonly than others, some more often than others. Some patterns of reasoning come up every single exam. Others come up every 5 exams. Others come up once in a blue moon. And the more exams that you do, the more that you work through and the more that you analyze, the more you will start to see these patterns. And these are patterns that I started to get back when I was studying, but it wasn't really until I started teaching this exam and looking into questions on a deeper level that I saw just how many patterns there are, how subtle they are, and seeing them come up again and again allowed me to better instruct others and teach others on this journey. Now, I want to emphasize the importance of the review process because that is the often neglected part of LSAT studying, too often overlooked, incredibly important. For every single question that you get wrong or have difficulty with, you've got to look at what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that made you pick it and what ultimately makes it wrong, and what is discouraging about the right answer choice that pushed you away from it and what ultimately makes it correct in the end. You've got to do this again and again and again. A lot of the tricks are in tempting wrong answers and discouraging right answers, of course, but not everything is about that. It could be there was something difficult about the method of reasoning in the stimulus or something about how the question stem was worded. So let's take LSAT logical reasoning, for example. They might use tricky, annoying words like unless, except, until, or without, which are not clearly necessary condition indicators or sufficient condition indicators. It might come down to requiring you to take the contrapositive of a conditional statement in order to link it to other conditional statements in the stimulus. It might just require the use of a difficult topic or terminology. A lot of pre-law students come from the humanities, and so science-related topics go a little bit over people's heads or intimidate them. And so increasing your familiarity and level of comfort with the kinds of topics that repeat on the LSAT would be incredibly useful. People ask me about, is it good to read The Economist, or is it good to read the Scientific American Journal or other journals of that nature? And the answer is yes, it can help, but it's not truly a substitute for actual LSAT studying. There are nearly 100 released exams, and so there's plenty of real logical reasoning questions and real reading comprehension passages for you to work through. So there's never truly a need to go beyond LSAT prep tests or previously administered exams. But if you're looking for something that's slightly casual to read during your commute or during your downtime and you don't have your LSAT books around, that could be useful for you. I also want to emphasize, along with the review process, the importance of keeping a mistake journal, a list of difficult problems you've encountered over the course of your LSAT studying that you can return to time and again to make sure that you fully understand everything that gave you trouble in the past. Because again, these things do repeat themselves. The method of reasoning might be the same even if the topic changes. So one exam, that method of reasoning could be about heart attacks. Another time it could be about climate change. Another time it could be about dinosaur extinction. The topics may change, but the underlying methods of reasoning remain constant. So I want to encourage you to look beyond simply the surface level topic that LSAT questions relate to. Got a question in the chat here. Is there a specific resource I recommend for learning how to study for the LSAT? Well, the most important resource is the actual LSAT exams themselves, published by LSAC. Again, they're called LSAT prep tests. Most of them are available in books of 10 for about $20, $25 each on Amazon, and I recommend getting at least a few of those. If you're taking the LSAT in a month or two, you might want to get the most recent 20 exams. If you're taking it in 3 or 4 months, maybe get 30 exams. If you're taking it 6 months or more, you might want to get 40 or 50 exams. Again, most of them are available in books of 10, about $20, $25 each. The newest ones are only available individually because LSAC has not yet published them in a book of 10. They're waiting until there are 10 of them to do that. So they are more expensive on an individual basis, typically around $10 each. And that might seem like a lot. You might consider not getting them, but I strongly recommend you get them because the exam does evolve over time. So more recent exams are more relevant. If one of those new exams that's only available individually, if an insight you get from that improves your score by even 1 or 2 points, that could lead to thousands of dollars in scholarship money or getting into a better law school. So the ROI on that is huge over the course of your entire career. It's the easiest money you'll ever make. Don't skimp on these. Aside from that, of course, personally, on the LSAT blog and the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast, I'm putting out tons of information on every aspect of LSAT preparation, games, reasoning, reading comp, law school admissions, retake advice, things of that nature. I have guides, cheat sheets, checklists, explanations, and of course, full video courses for every section of the exam. Somebody asked about the older exams, like exams 42 to 51. Are there any changes? Yes, there have been some changes since that time. Most notably is that the exam started including dual or comparative reading comprehension passages with the June 2007 exam, which appears immediately after exam number 51. Prior to that time, there were 4 long reading comprehension passages. Now there are 3 long, and then the 2 short dual passages on a related topic. That is the most noteworthy change. A more subtle change is that starting with exam 57, LSAC introduced a rule substitution or rule equivalency question in logic games. Nearly every single logic games section since exam number 57, which was around 2009, included a question like this. So if you're only using those older exams, you're not going to come across that question type. Another change is that starting with exam number 66, which is June 2012, I believe, they changed the layout of logic games from being a single page per game to spreading the games across 2 pages. And now with the digital LSAT, things have even changed since then as well. You could get a couple of free exams in the digital LSAT format on LSAC's website at familiar.lsac.org. They currently have 3 exams in the digital LSAT format. Those exams are 71, 73, and 74, and presumably they will release more exams in the digital format in the coming months. but I strongly recommend, once again, getting the newest exams. Got another question here about the writing sample. Any recommendations on how to tackle the writing sample? So the writing sample actually isn't worth spending too much time on because it's not scored. Some law schools don't look at it, although now that the LSAT writing sample is digital and typed, law schools are much more likely to look at it because they don't have to navigate chicken scratch handwriting. I've heard from a couple of law school admission officers that they would read maybe 1 in 10 of them would actually be legible back when it was handwritten. But now that it's digital, that's no longer a concern. So I would put a bit more effort into doing it properly. Not that I would ever suggest treating it like a joke. It is important, especially if English is not your native language and law schools may be concerned about your English fluency. This is a good chance to demonstrate that you are in fact fluent in English. And also if your grades in college were a little bit lower than they should have been, especially in the humanities or English classes or writing classes, this is once again a good opportunity to show them that you are good at writing, you are proficient in English and the written word. The writing sample is no longer done at the LSAT test center. You can now do it online from your own device. You have up to 1 year after your LSAT test administration to complete the writing sample, but law schools do want to see it. You really do need to submit it before they will consider your applications. But other than that, it's not worth spending too much time talking about, although I'm happy to handle follow-ups of a more specific nature. Got another question in the chat here. Parker's asking, is there a cutoff date from which published LSATs would no longer be relevant for studying? The answer is no. All numbered LSATs starting with June 1991, exam number 1, are perfectly relevant for LSAT studying, although more recent exams are more relevant. So if you're studying for the LSAT anytime within the next 6 months, I don't think you need to use the oldest LSAT test forms. I think you could probably be fine with using exams 42 and up or 52 and up if you're studying in the next 3 to 6, if you're taking it in the next 3 to 6 months. But if you are totally committed to getting a top score and you're allowing more than 6 months to take the LSAT, then I would suggest getting more of them if you can, if you'll have the time, if you truly want to see all the patterns. And maybe you don't want to do every single question in all released exams, but if you're committed to, let's say, getting a perfect score on LSAT logic games specifically, you might want to do all released LSAT logic games, even if you don't do all released LSAT reading comp or all released LSAT logical reasoning questions. But again, overall, more recent is more relevant. A particular reason to do the oldest logic games is that there has been a trend in recent exams of weird curveball games that don't neatly fit the mold of, let's say, ordering games, grouping games, combination games. They're just weird in some way. They require wacky diagrams, or they're more like pattern games. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Focus on the classic types for now. But as you get closer to your test date, if you're comfortable with the basic games and you want to do the weird games, some of the older ones could be useful for that purpose. Another question here, how to get back on the horse when it comes to LSAT prep. Let's say you've gotten busy, you've fallen off track, you're feeling discouraged. Great question. I do have a couple of recommendations for this, and these are adapted from Nir Ayal's book, Indistractable. He talks about 3 different ways to make yourself indistractable when it comes to anything, really, and I've adapted these for use for LSAT prep specifically. They are effort, price, and identity. Effort is making it as easy as possible to do whatever it is you want to do. So let's say your goal is, of course, studying for the LSAT. How do you make it as easy as possible? It might involve getting multiple LSAT books, leaving some books in your car, some books at work, some books at home, some books in your locker if you have a locker somewhere, so that there's never a place or time where you are without your LSAT books, making it as easy as possible to study. If you're commuting frequently or you're on the go frequently, you might want to use podcasts and YouTube videos, both of which I have plenty of. Again, I have the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel and podcast, so you can listen and watch and study on the go wherever you are. Really, you can passively absorb some useful LSAT information, even if you're busy with other things. You also might want to take the guesswork out of LSAT studying by using my LSAT study plans. I've made it as simple as possible, breaking it down for you step by step, day by day to know exactly what to do and what not to do every single day over the course of your prep. And I'll get more into those in a little bit, but that's the general idea, making it easy so that minimizing the effort involved to study. Next is price. And this really involves incentives. You could set up an agreement with your significant other or a friend or a study partner where every day you don't do X number of hours of studying or X number of LSAT problems, you charge yourself. Maybe you want to commit $5 per day that you don't study enough to your favorite charity or to your accountability partner, just to put some skin in the game to make it as easy as possible for you to stay accountable to yourself and to others as well. Then there's identity. Identity, who you are. How do you define yourself? Remember, you are a future lawyer. You are a lean, mean, LSAT destroying machine. This is your identity. You are not someone who has difficulty focusing. You're not someone who lacks motivation. You are on a mission to destroy this exam. Take that on as your identity and then act in accordance with who you are and who you want to be, which is, of course, an LSAT destroying machine, which means you will do whatever it takes to conquer this exam. I also have some motivation videos on my YouTube channel, a playlist of videos to help you get in the right mindset to conquer this exam. Now, I got to follow up on that writing sample question. You don't do it during the LSAT anymore. You used to, but now you do it later after your test administration date. So if you have not yet taken the LSAT, then you are not yet able to complete the writing sample online. But let's say you're registered for an upcoming LSAT. Once you take that LSAT, then the option opens up for you to complete the writing sample, but not before that. As for the best LSAT book, I'd simply say the actual official LSAT prep tests published by the Law School Admission Council. And then if you're looking for other books, I'm fairly agnostic as to which others to get. All I would recommend is that you make sure that they use real LSAT questions. And if they do so, they will say it on the cover. They will tell you the month and year in which the exams included were administered. And you want more recent exams if possible. More recent means more relevant. And if a book doesn't say it uses real LSAT questions, it probably doesn't, because they would have to pay a licensing fee to LSAC to use those questions, and they will definitely advertise it to show you what they're doing. Now, I have some LSAT retake strategies in mind for you specifically in terms of preparing for LSAT retakes if you're retaking, but even if not, you will still likely find these useful. The first is redoing exams. Even if you've done every single exam ever administered or all the recent ones, that's okay. There is a lot of value in redoing LSAT exams because the value is not simply to diagnose your weak areas or problem areas. It's to not simply to know where you stand. It's to better understand the problems. And if you've done an exam before and you're doing it again, would you get a 180 on that exam, a perfect 180? If not, there's probably still something to learn from those exams. And there are plenty of exams actually, aside from the numbered LSAT prep tests. There are currently 80-something numbered ones, but there are several that are unnumbered, including the June 2007 LSAT PDF available for free on LSAC's website. There are the lettered super prep exams, A, B, and C, along with C2. And there's an exam called the Official LSAT Prep Test with Explanations, which is the February 1997 exam. So there are nearly 100 exams available for you to use, and very few people have done all of them. I'm the exception in this case. Definitely avoid those fake LSAT exams, though. Fake LSAT problems contain mistakes and are often unrealistic. A lot of those books on Amazon with fake LSAT problems contain typos, and they're incredibly frustrating. The reviews make that very clear. If you're retaking, you do want to look at your weaknesses, identify them. And even if you took an exam that was previously unreleased, a lot of them these days are not released because they're reusing those exams for future administrations, then you could simply look at the 3 to 5 most recent exams you've done, even if you did them on your own, and those will give you a good indication of where you stand. I call this the law of averages. A lot of folks will get discouraged if they take one exam and the result isn't great, but it could be an outlier. Maybe you didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe you were inordinately stressed out. Maybe that exam had an especially tough game section or reading comp passage that threw you off. So don't place too much stock in any one exam. Use the law of averages. Take the most 3 to 5 recent exams you've taken, put those together, average them, and that will be a good indication of where you stand. When you're reviewing, don't look only at the problems that you got wrong. Also look at anything you had difficulty with, because even if you got it right, it could have just as easily gone the other way the next time around. And so it's wrong in a certain sense and worth reviewing just the same. When you're reviewing, also, again, look at, was your problem from the stimulus, the question stem, or the answer choices? There are tons of tricks scattered throughout this exam, and it's worth taking the time to go deep on them, analyze them, and see where your mistakes came from. Let's see what else. I've talked about schedules already. I've talked about prep tests already. Don't just use random free stuff you find online. Don't just use random LSAT forums. A lot of folks are using Khan Academy because it's free and it's a great source of real official LSAT exams, but it's not truly a cohesive system or plan of attack for you. It's problems with explanations, but I wouldn't limit your prep only to Khan Academy simply because it's free. There are higher quality resources out there. It's worth taking the time to investigate them. Now, let's see what else. The digital LSAT specifically, make sure that you're preparing for the digital LSAT if that is in fact what you're taking. Nearly everyone in North America, with the exception of a few accommodated test takers, is doing the digital LSAT. So again, go on LSAC's site at familiar.lsac.org to do the exams in the digital LSAT format. And I don't love recommending you that you go out and buy something, but it is worth doing at least 1 or 2 exams on a tablet to get a good feel for what the flow of the exam is like. So any tablet is fine. It could be a Samsung, could be an iPad, could be an Amazon Fire tablet, just to get used to doing the questions with a touch screen. Borrow one from a friend or a family member if you have to, but it's worth taking the time because it is a different experience than doing it on paper. And if most of your prep is on paper, treat your books like screens. Don't write on them. Instead, do your work on scratch paper to the side. On the digital LSAT, you will get 12 to 14 pages of scratch paper where you can write for all sections, not just the games section. That paper is 8.5 by 11. And so it's not unlimited, but it's more than enough for most people. And keep your writing neat. Stay organized and make your notes clear enough that you could look back at them a week from now and you would still be able to recognize and understand what you'd previously written. Any questions on digital LSAT, please feel free to follow up. Now, coming back to the idea of thinking like a 180 score, what would a 180 LSAT score be able to do? A couple of creative ideas outside the box here for when you're proficient and you have a strong foundation. You could try writing your own LSAT questions, writing your own LSAT logic games, even mini drills of your own, testing things like conditionality, testing things like the contrapositive. Or you could write a bonus question or bonus LSAT answer choice for a logic game, just to start to think like an LSAT test maker. This is not to spend too much time on it and not if you're still learning the basics, but down the line, if you're already scoring the 160s or above, it's worth starting to think about this. You could also try explaining LSAT problems to a friend or a study buddy or a coach or a tutor. There's something about articulating things, either talking it out or writing it out, that forces you to go beyond simply saying, okay, I get it now and moving on. And you could also, as part of your mistake journal review process, writing your own explanations, writing your own thought process out for the LSAT problems that give you trouble to make sure that you truly, fully understand them. Now, I had a question here about, there's plenty of questions here in the chat. Actually, I will run through those bit by bit, starting with the one on the digital LSAT. So any tips and tricks for logic games for the digital exam, not getting lost looking back and forth, because you have to look back and forth between the scratch paper and the screen. And it's really just practice, get used to it. If you have the PDFs of the exams, you could load those up on your computer screen, have your scratch paper to the side and go back and forth with those. Or using the 3 on LSAC's site. Again, the site is familiar.lsac.org. Familiar.lsac.org. Go on there. There's 3 exams in the format right now. There will presumably be more in the future. Now, if you're a current college junior studying for the LSAT, when should you take it? There's no 1 month or one time to take it. It's whenever you are ready. Whenever you have had a good amount of time to study and you feel confident walking in. A lot of folks try to knock it out in 2 to 3 months. I recommend 5 to 6 months to reach your fullest potential on the exam with a minimum of 3 months. Some folks in college might want to study over the summer and take it in the fall, or might want to study a bit in the fall and then during your winter break and take it in the spring. It's really up to you. I don't have any one particular month I like better than others. They're all equal in difficulty. There's no advantage to taking it in one month or another from the perspective of how difficult is the exam. I like the idea of taking it in the spring or summer as a goal so that you can retake it before the late fall if necessary. So you could aim to take it in March or April, then retake in June or July, and then apply at the very beginning of the cycle in the fall. Law school admissions is conducted on a rolling basis, meaning that they evaluate applications in the order in which they receive them. And there is some advantage to applying earlier rather than later. The earlier you apply, the more scholarship money is available and the higher your odds are. But it's not a big deal to apply later in the fall, or even in November is totally fine. January is the last date I would take the LSAT to apply that cycle. If you're taking it in February or March, I would not apply this cycle. I would instead wait to apply the following fall, approximately 6 to 7 months later. Nobody ever wants to hear the advice of delaying a cycle and applying later, but in the grand scheme of things, 1 year will make a huge difference. And if you get into a better law school or you get more scholarship money as a result, that can have a ripple effect over the course of your entire career. Definitely worth the wait in the long run. Now, let's see what other questions in the chat here. Strategy and doing easier questions first. So the order of difficulty is most apparent on the logical reasoning section of the LSAT. They go roughly from easy to hard, so the first 10 are a lot easier than the last 10. So I recommend simply doing things in the order given for the most part, because everything is worth the same. Harder questions are not worth more. So knock out the easiest questions first, get your lowest hanging fruit out of the way first, and then move up to the tougher questions later in the section. In terms of pacing on logical reasoning, I like to recommend doing the first 10 questions at a pretty fast pace to build up a time bank to tackle the tougher questions later in the section. Maybe skipping the toughest ones to come back to at the end, because it is a rough order of difficulty, not a perfect order of difficulty. Games, rough order of difficulty, easy to hard. Reading comp, also a rough order of difficulty, easy to hard, but things could vary based on your comfort level with a certain game type or a certain reading comprehension topic. So your mileage may vary, but I typically recommend doing things in the order given. Got a few questions on reading comprehension. So let's see. Mastering the reading comprehension section. First off, simply read a lot and do a lot of reading comprehension passages. There are nearly 400 released LSAT reading comp passages, plenty of practice material. In terms of order of approach, I said do the passages in the order given, but within a passage itself, a particular grouping of questions, I would say do the general global questions first, meaning main idea, primary purpose, and passage organization. Then the more detail-oriented reading comprehension questions that refer to a specific phrase. And then finally, the tougher, more inferential questions. With regard to logical reasoning, logic games, order of approach, it's a little bit different. For logic games, I would recommend doing the orientation question first, then the local if questions, then finally the global, general, must be true questions. The reason for this is that if you do the local if questions first, you will build up a library of hypothetical scenarios, valid game scenarios that you can use to knock out the more general questions later in the game. In logical reasoning, simply easy to hard already, skip the toughest ones, like let's say for a lot of folks, it'll be the parallel questions or the principal application questions that are a bit more wordy. Skip those, flag them, come back to them at the end. One nice thing about the digital LSAT is that they have a flagging function built in. So you can mark off a question, and at a glance on the bottom of the entire section, you can see which questions you flagged to come back to at the end at a glance. You get a bird's eye view of all the questions you've done, which ones you've bubbled, which ones you haven't. And that's a bonus. Hey, for the digital LSAT, no more time gridding in solely filling in that oval with your number 2 pencil. Instead, it's instantaneous. You click or tap, you're done. You've bubbled in that question, you move on. That probably saves you a minute or two for every section. Definitely a good thing there. So the digital LSAT, a lot of folks have concerns, but it isn't all bad. It's a mix of good and bad. And I think the hype is overblown with regard to it. There have been a number of tech issues with the tablets not always working properly, but LSAC is hopefully working out the kinks with each successive test administration. One thing I should mention for digital while we're on it is that some folks experience glare with overhead lighting. So when you walk into the test center on test day, look overhead and see, is there glare on your tablet screen, making it difficult to read whatever's on the tablet? If so, see if adjusting the tablet angle can help. And if it doesn't, talk to the proctor before the test starts so that they can move you to a seat where this is not an issue. Let's see, more questions in the chat. Overcoming time constraints on the LSAT timing issue. I mean, to a large extent, you get faster by getting better at the exam. You get better at it by studying properly. And so this comes back to LSAT study plans, making it as easy as possible to study properly. Now, the framework underlying my LSAT study plans is what I call the LASER approach to LSAT studying. LASER is an acronym standing for learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. Learning is theory, reading textbook chapters, watching videos to build your foundation, build your familiarity with each section and question type. Accuracy is doing individual questions by type to build your understanding of the questions and seeing the patterns between questions of a similar type. S is for sections, doing timed 35-minute sections to work on your pacing. E is for exams and endurance, doing full-length 5-section exams because it can be really grueling and difficult to do a bunch of sections in a row. 5 sections is about 3 hours, or even a little bit more than that, including the break, because you're doing 3 sections back-to-back with no break, then a short 10-minute break or so, then 2 more sections back-to-back. Even my brain is fried after that experience, and so it's worth doing at least 10 full-length timed exams before test day. That's 5-section exams, not 4. The published prep tests only include 4 sections because they're not publishing the experimental section. They are saving that for use on a future test administration. So what you want to do is, let's say you're doing exams 86, 87, 88, and 89 as full-length timed exams before test day. You could take exam number 90, divide it into 4 parts, and splice in each one of those sections into one of the other exams, 86, 87, 88, 89, and then later, after you've done all 4 of those, tally your results for exam 90 to see what it might have been like had you taken it as a separate full-length timed exam. So that's E for exams and endurance. Finally, R is for review, which is the process I described earlier, analyzing tempting wrong answers, discouraging right answers, keeping a mistake journal, explaining problems to a friend, writing it out, talking with a study buddy or a coach or a tutor. Really worth taking it out of your head, because otherwise it's too easy to look at the correct answer or watch a video explanation or read an explanation, then say, I get it now, and moving on, when you don't truly get it. Worth slowing down, taking the time to make sure that you fully understand it, because things do repeat themselves. Those mistakes will come up again. By the way, speaking of practice tests, doing those 10 full-length timed exams before test day, I want to share with you what I call Steve's LSAT practice test rule. This rule is maximum 2 tests per week and minimum 2 hours of review per exam. 2 tests per week maximum, 2 hours per review minimum. That's because reviewing is too often overlooked, and it's worth taking the time to review properly, and doing more than 2 exams per week will lead to burnout, with a few exceptions. If you are studying full-time and have no other obligations, you're not working, you're not in school, family life is not a big obligation for you, then maybe, just maybe, you could do 3 exams in a week. I would never do exams on consecutive days, and I would never do a second exam until you have fully reviewed the first. And reviewing exams takes time. It takes a lot of time. It's grueling, and that's why people often don't want to do it properly. Think about it. Let's say you got a 170 on your practice test, which is really tough to get. Very few people even do that. A 170 means you got about 10 questions wrong. But there may have also been another 10 to 15 problems that you guessed on and got lucky on, got them right through luck alone, or maybe you weren't 100% confident in your answer, and it could have just as easily gone the other way. 10 questions wrong plus 10 to 15 that you guessed on or weren't totally confident in means you've got about 20, 25 problems to review. And taking 5 to 10 minutes to review each problem quickly adds up, could easily take a couple of hours there. So minimum 2 hours for reviewing each exam that you do. Again, never do exams on consecutive days. It's a recipe for burnout. And never more than 2 exams in a week with few exceptions. Now, also ask yourself, why are you doing these exams? What are you looking to get out of them? If your exam is in less than a week, maybe you only want to do 1 exam because you don't want to burn out. You want to walk into test day fresh. And you want to leave on a high note. So let's say you could do 2 exams in the next week, but you do the first exam and it goes great. Don't do the second one. Leave on a high note, walk in feeling good. You don't want to necessarily risk having a lower score that could decrease your morale a little bit or decrease your confidence a bit. You want to walk in feeling good. You also don't want to do these exams simply because you feel like you need to or that you're missing something and you want to cram. Cramming is a recipe for burnout. This is not a test that you cram for. It just doesn't work that way. It's not a test for memorization. There's nothing new to learn in the final week. Instead, this is an exam of pattern recognition. And in the final week, you pretty much either know it or you don't. You could maybe learn a little bit more, but if you're not feeling great, maybe this exam is not the one that you want to take. Maybe you want to register for another one just as a backup. So if you have another opportunity to take it in the next month or 2, maybe register for that exam as well, even if you don't think you'll need it, even if you're not sure that you'll need it, because it could give you a certain peace of mind, to know that this is not the only opportunity for you. Because while the Lsat as a whole is incredibly important, no one particular test date will make or break you. Law schools do not average multiple scores, so there's no downside to retaking if you think you could do better. And it's kind of funny, but there's a margin of error or a score band on Lsat scores of about 3 points on either end, meaning if you truly deserved a 160, let's say that was your true aptitude, maybe one day you get a 163, maybe the next day you get a 157. So people will say, my scores are fluctuating, what do I do? There's nothing wrong here. Even if there's a 6-point score band there, the Lsat's a perfectly valid test. Variation and fluctuations are totally normal. So if you take the Lsat in a week and you get a 160 on it, if you take the Lsat a month later, even if you learn nothing new, through luck alone, you might do 3 points better. And if you do 3 points worse, no big deal, because law schools, again, don't average multiple scores. They only take the highest. So 163 would open far more doors than a 160 would, and certainly more than a 157 would. So really, no downside. Of course, applying later would be a problem. But let's say that your tests were September and October, or July and September. In that case, you're still applying perfectly early. No big deal at all. Happy to address follow-ups on anything I've discussed up to this point. I've talked quite a bit, and the chat's still open. I've still got some more nuanced questions I could get to, but I prefer to handle more general ones that are more broadly applicable here. Somebody asked about apps for logic games. I don't think that's really a good way to go about it. There aren't really any apps that let you do logic games. Diagramming is an issue, of course. You could do Sudoku. That loosely relates to logic games in some ways because it involves deductive reasoning, step by step. Things kind of build upon each other. So that could be useful, but I wouldn't truly call that Lsat studying. Crosswords also loosely relate, but again, I think the best prep is actual official Lsat questions. And so if you're in a setting where you can't really do them, I would say instead listen to my podcast, watch my YouTube videos, study in that way. And maybe if you have the PDFs, you could load them onto your phone or tablet or computer and do those when you're on the go. Can you retake the Lsat a year after you take it the first time? Absolutely. LSAC actually instituted a fairly recent retake limit. It used to be you could take the Lsat an unlimited number of times. Now you can only take it 3 times in one testing cycle. cycles run from June to May of the following year. So you could take it in September, November, and then February, totally fine. But then you wouldn't be able to take it again until the following June. But if you've only taken it once, you could certainly retake it a year later or even sooner than that if you want to. The other limits on the taking are only 5 times in, it's escaping me for the moment. I think it's 5 times in 5 years, 7 times for life. And once you've taken it, once you got a 180, you cannot take it again. So there are some limits there, but they're not especially stringent. They place these limits because they are reusing tests more often than ever before, because they need to, because they used to only offer the LSAT 4 times a year and produce 3 new test forms a year. But going forward, they're now offering it 10 times a year, and they can't produce that many exams because it costs too much and it's too much work. So they're making several exams per year unreleased or undisclosed, meaning that you don't get to see a copy of the questions afterwards because they want to save it for use overseas, for Sabbath observers administrations, for inclement weather issues or tech issues. So that's unfortunate because it would be nice to be able to see it every single time, but it's a constraint that they have as an organization. So that's the reason there, but not a huge deal. Like I said, even if you can't see the test that you took, just look at your recent practice tests, and those will give you a good way to analyze your weak areas and areas that you might want to focus on going forward. Let's see other questions here in the chat. Someone who took the LSAT several years ago, would that score still be available? So your LSAT score report goes back to the previous 5 years. So if you took it anytime within the past 5 years, that score is still available and still good for applying to law school. But more recent scores are obviously better. And if it's more than 5 years old, you've got to retake it. So that's pretty much the short answer on that. Again, they don't average multiple scores. They only take the highest. So let's say your older score is lower or not as good as you think you could do now, then it certainly would be worth retaking. And a score that's exactly 5 years old or 4.5 years old might not be looked upon by admissions as being as indicative of your abilities as one that's more recent. Because, of course, things do change over time, and who you were at 20 is not who you are at 24. Maybe you could do better now. And, of course, if you're not in the academic mindset, maybe you would do worse now. So you could apply with that score. It's really up to you. But, of course, it is worth applying with the best score possible that reflects your true potential. Because, again, scholarship money, getting into a better school, that has a huge impact over the course of your entire career. It's well worth making the investment. It's really the easiest money you'll ever make. I appreciate your attention and engagement over the course of this class tonight. You all asked great questions. Please keep in touch and let me know if I can help in any way as I move forward. I'm happy to help however I can. Feel free to reach out through the blog, the YouTube channel, the podcast, the Facebook group. I'm a real person. I'm here for you, and feel free to reach out anytime. Anyway, all have a good night. Keep in touch. I wish you all the best. Good night. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.